I know my next fight is definitely going to be for the title, and obviously disappointed, but at the same time, you know, it's just going to be a part of my story. I'm going to get some rest, and mark my words, I am getting that belt back.
The glory days are over. The days where Alexander Volkanovski was truly the great. His undefeated record in the UFC, the featherweight crown, and his ranking as the pound-for-pound #1 were testament to his unrivaled greatness. But then he was beaten.
And still
defeated. And brutally disposed. Now, a path is open for him to reclaim his vacant throne, but I don't know if he can. Imagine doubting Alexander Volkanovski against a featherweight a few years ago, but at UFC 314, history, numbers, and time are not on his side. In the main event of UFC 314, Alexander Volkanovski has a shot to re-establish his dominance at 145, but he'll have to get past Diego Lopes, a dangerous contender who sees him as a legend to dethrone and not an unstoppable force. Two of Dana White's privileged are also clashing in the co-main event of UFC 314. After years of unwarranted #1 contender matchups, Michael Chandler is finally facing a prospect ranked below him, while Paddy Pimblett gets a crack at the top. Pun absolutely intended.
Every single night since the day before the press conference, I've had demonic dreams. Legions of demons are attacking me every single time I sleep.
There's a spiritual battle going on between Bryce Mitchell and Gene Silva, and in the featured fight of the pay-per-view, this clash gets resolved. Finally, Patricio Pitbull, the most decorated fighter in Bellator history, heads to the UFC octagon, and it's do or die in this first fight as he faces former interim champion Yair Rodriguez. We are so back.
Thank you to the fighting business. Absolutely amazing.
One of my favorite new channels going right now.
Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull.
The last couple months, we've been talking a lot about the PFL. They're canceling a lot of shows. You're going to have people that want to jump ship. I'm sure you're going to see a lot of that, and we'll see how this plays out.
We have a UFC newcomer on the card, and I feel Patricio Pitbull deserves a spotlight on TFB. For those of you who don't know the man, he is a Bellator double champion, having won both the featherweight and lightweight titles. He also tried to win the belt at 135, but that one didn't work out. Regardless, double champion at 145 and 155 is stellar, and at featherweight, he successfully managed 9 title defenses across 3 title reigns. Pitbull also has the most fights in Bellator history, not just featherweights, but the entire promotion. Most wins in Bellator history, most title wins in Bellator history. Patricio Pitbull is basically the Michael Jordan of Bellator. By the way, can we start saying LeBron James by now? But anyways, with those impressive records to his name, the guy is also up there in age, and he will be making his debut at 145 at 37 years of age, and his opponent is 32 years young, Yair Rodriguez. Mad respect to Pitbull for this. He knows that time is not on his side, and to become champion, he has to dive into the deep end of the division and take on the elite. Yair is coming off 2 losses, but make no mistake, the former interim champion is still one of the most dynamic and dangerous featherweights around.
Yeah, he's not dynamic, but I have a power, and I'm gonna smash it.
He will also absolutely dwarf Patricio in height and reach. Yair stands at 5'11 with a massive 71-inch reach, while Pitbull, a stocky and short powerhouse, is only 5'6 with a 65-inch reach. That's a 6-inch reach disadvantage against a striker as rangy, quick, and unorthodox as Rodriguez, and this isn't Bellator. The UFC's featherweight division is a different beast, and Yair represents that next level of opposition.
Is it true in the midst of all this stuff that you when you DM'd Yair about the March 29th date that you said, where is your Mexican pride? February 14th, just got your answer, pussy.
I'm over that fucking shit, you know, I'm here to fight now.
Yeah.
We're in the fighting business.
The key to victory against someone like Yair is simple. Pressure, close the gap, and make it a dogfight. If Pitbull lets Yair get comfortable at range, he'll be eating kicks all night. A legend of Bellator stepping into enemy territory to test himself against the UFC's best. Octagon jitters are real, but there are examples of outsiders succeeding. In the opening fight of the main card, we'll know whether Patricio Pitbull can rise to the occasion under the brightest light, or whether Yair Rodriguez can prove that there is UFC levels. Bryce Mitchell versus Gene Silva. At first glance, this looks like a regular bout between 2 featherweights outside the top 10, but Let me tell you, there's a lot more at play than you realize. This is basically Armageddon, the ultimate clash of good against evil. You have the chosen one, boosted with the power of prayers and empowered by God Almighty himself, and opposing him is a demon possessing a human vessel. When in the presence of someone as holy as Bryce, he revealed his true self.
You barking up the wrong tree, motherfucker!
The proof is in the Bible. The demons are out in full force. That's at least how Bryce Mitchell sees this. Where do we start with Bryce? Not too long ago, he was touted as a decent prospect, skilled and undefeated, until he got run over and battered by Ilia Topuria. Then he got famous for being the first UFC fighter to have a CTE-induced seizure when Josh Emmett nearly sent him to the Lord. Maybe that knockout led to what we see today. Bryce was always a little nutty, but one day someone gave him the bright idea of starting a podcast. And
I honestly think that Hitler was a good guy based upon my own research, not my public education indoctrination. I really do think before Hitler got on meth, he was a guy I'd go fishing with.
Bryce was now public enemy number one, and mere hours after he said what he said, Dana White ran him down in a press conference, and right there and then, you can tell by the look on Dana's face, he was going to put Bryce through hell.
Literally one of the dumbest human beings. Let's not forget that this is a guy who took a drill through his nutsack, then had to reverse it and put the drill back out of his... That's the level of stupid.
Right, if he goes out and wins a fight and gets a mic...
Well, that's the beautiful thing about this business. For all of you that hate Bryce Mitchell, you get to see him hopefully get his ass whooped.
Enter Gene Silva. Make no mistake, one day you will see Gene Silva compete for the title. He's that good, undefeated in the UFC and a certified killer with 12 knockouts. Silva called out Bryce Mitchell after his KO over Melzik, and Dana White was probably ecstatic.
You wanted to put on a show. You did that. Who do you want next?
Bryce Mitchell. Dana, put me in front of him, and I'll do the job.
And I'm sure Gene Silva is too. He's getting the biggest heel in the division fed to him on a silver platter and on a card that is stacked, and most importantly, on paper. He is supposed to beat the shit out of Bryce.
UFC 314 in Miami. What do you have to do in that fight to make it feel satisfied?
Terra redonda. I'm gonna make Bryce Mitchell see the earth is round.
Silva is one of the biggest favorites on the card, and for good reason. He may not be as powerful a puncher as Josh, but he's still pretty scary. He may not give Bryce another seizure, but he can definitely knock him out cold, as he has done to nearly everyone he's fought. Bryce has one path to victory, and it's the same path he always takes: wrestle, grind, and pray. If he can somehow close the distance without getting his soul snatched, if he can drag Silva into the deep waters, and if he can make it ugly, then maybe, just maybe, he can survive. But those are a lot of ifs for a guy who's one uppercut away from astral projection of the serious kind. This is looking like a human sacrifice. The UFC knows it, Silva knows it, Dana White definitely knows it. But at the same time, if Bryce pulls it off, just imagine if Bryce Mitchell upsets the odds and beats Gene frickin' Silva, and then he gets the mic. Oh boy. Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett. In the co-main event of UFC 314, Mike, I'll never see you at the top, Chandler faces Paddy Pimblett. After numerous chances at the very elite of the division, Chandler is finally going to fight someone down the ranking. Can you believe that this dude is still ranked number 7? Boggles the mind, but maybe that's another video for another time. After sitting out for 2 years waiting for McGregor, Chandler returned at UFC 309 and was instantly granted a number 1 contender fight against Charles Oliveira. For the most part, he was outclassed by Du Bronx despite all the cheating, but he did have a moment in the 5th round and spoke his usual shtick in the post-fight interview, so it was not a completely devastating loss.
Forget calling out Islam, maybe Max Holloway for the BMF belt, or Conor McGregor!
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
Still, that was an L, and now he was 2-4 in the UFC, but here he is, still getting Dana White privilege, co-main of a stacked pay-per-view card, and he's facing a popular prospect at 155, Paddy Pimblett. Unlike Chandler, Paddy is on an upward trajectory and has good momentum. He beat the corpse of Tony Ferguson, but his win over Bobby Green, quick and effortless, was well done. The submission was poetry, and he didn't look too lost on his feet either. Whichever way you look at it, this matchup is a win-win for the UFC. You bet that the winner will get a contender fight next, and the loser will remain in the top 10, because he fought well, you guys. Dana White privilege, folks.
I'm still extremely hungry. I had a great training camp last camp. I was extremely confident, so I plan on doing that again the next 8 weeks against Paddy Pimblett, and showing up April 12th in Miami, knocking his block off, doing a couple backflips, ripping off a promo, and I'm going to remind the UFC fans why I deserve to be in that top discussion.
A lot of people, including me, doubted that Paddy would ever reach this place, but he did. And whether you like him or not, he's clearly getting better and better. A few years ago, Chandler would have been a massive favorite, but now, not so much. Iron Mike has clearly slowed down over the years, and the 2 years thirsting for McGregor definitely didn't help. He is 38 now, 8 years older than Paddy, and if that Charles fight is any indication, Paddy might just grind his way to a win here too. Chandler always has the power and explosiveness to end any lightweight, but the real question is whether he can keep it over 3 rounds. We've seen time and time again that his aggressive style burns bright but fades fast. If Paddy can force a few grappling exchanges, then the tide could shift. Chandler has been submitted 1 time, but let me remind you, Paddy was the first one to submit Green since 2009, so a submission is definitely possible. This is the biggest test of Paddy's career. He's improving, but he's never faced someone with the raw athleticism and power of Chandler. His striking, while decent, lacks defense, and Chandler blitzes could put him in serious trouble early.
He comes out and he tries to absolutely take your head off, swinging overhands, left hooks, and that's all anyone's ever tried to do against me and knock me out, and no one's ever knocked me out. Michael Chandler's not going to be the first person to.
Yeah, he has never been KO'd before, but Tony was never put out cold before Chandler either. Fuck.
Scousers don't get knocked out. We'll put his name to the test. Let's go, baby!
This fight is really a perfect example of UFC matchmaking at work, and the promotion getting what it wants either way. If Chandler wins, he gets another undeserved high-profile fight, probably a title eliminator. If Paddy wins, he becomes a legitimate top-tier lightweight, and the UFC gets a new star in the making. Either way, the promotion wins. But I have a feeling this fight will deliver, and will win some too. Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. Let me rewind and take you back to the reign of Alexander the Great, who conquered the featherweight division in record time, and at one point, it seemed as if it was never going to end. From beating Jose Aldo, mauling Brian Ortega, to making Max Holloway look slow and stiff.
What more can you ask for from a champ? 50-45 across the board, and you just don't see that happen to Max Holloway.
Volk at 145 was unbeatable, but his absolute peak was seen at 155 in the champ versus champ clash at UFC 284. Islam was supposed to squash the featherweight king, but the last visual was the complete opposite, with Volk beating Makhachev on the ground, and who knows, a couple of seconds more and we would be looking at a completely different timeline. He lost the competitive fight by decision, but some swore that he won. Volk himself said after the fight that business was yet to be settled, and one day, in the near future, he was going to face Islam again and become lightweight champion.
I'm hearing that he was saying, I heard it, I could be wrong, that he was going back to his corner saying he wants a rematch because he thought he lost. I'm going to jump on that. Rematch.
But that future came a lot earlier than he expected. In hindsight, this was a fatal mistake, probably one of the worst ones we've ever seen. I can get that Volk was full of confidence after how the first fight ended, but the circumstances were completely different. The rematch was on short notice, with Volk having a few weeks to prepare, while Islam, properly hydrated and on a mission, was way too much. He kicked Volk in the head and pretty much ruined him. Maybe for good. While this was going on, a new title challenger emerged at 145, Ilia Topuria. He was already plenty scary, undefeated, vicious, and full of confidence, and with Volk getting KO'd, Topuria, a knockout artist, suddenly seemed like a terrible matchup for the once unstoppable champion. This is where Volk made his second mistake, when he returned way too early after such a bad knockout. Just months after the loss to Islam, Volk was back in the cage against Topuria. Here, I get it too. He was looking to shake off the defeat and get back on track, and he did look good, until he didn't. Two savage knockout losses in a span of a couple of months. Lost his undefeated featherweight record, his belt, more of his chin, and maybe his greatness too. Feels bad, man.
Again, he did, he did a great job there. So there's not much I can say other than congrats to him. But I've been a champ for a long time, and I want that rematch. So it's that's something that it needs to happen. So
when the immediate rematch talk started, A lot of us freaked out because it looked like Volk was going to make yet another terrible mistake. As good as he was, he had little chance against someone like Topuria, especially given what he had gone through, but thankfully, this remained a rumor. Topuria started talking about vacating the belt, and Volk was briefly linked to an interim title bout with other folks. This went on for a while, until it was announced Topuria had vacated the title and moved up to 155. Good news. Volk is protected from another Topuria knockout, which was almost certainly going to happen. Bad news, he might get chinned by another berserker, Diego Lopes. People forget, man, but once upon a time, Lopes was a Dana White contender hopeful, and he couldn't make it. He was brought back for a short notice bout against undefeated Movsar Evloev, with the UFC probably thinking that he would get squashed, but Lopes, who had a rare second chance, gave Evloev all he could handle. This was the first and so far the only time Evloev was given a fight of the night bonus, and needless to say, it wasn't because of him. Since that night, Lopes has been undefeated and he has kept his momentum, fighting often and brutalizing nearly everyone except for Dan Ige. Getting pressed by Ige on 2 hours notice was a bad look, but considering the roller coaster the dude went through, I'll give it a pass. He more than made up for this against Brian Ortega, beating the hell out of him and winning a dominant decision. I do have to point out that he did fatigue towards the end, and that could be an issue against someone like Volk. This is pretty simple to break down. Volkanovski, technically speaking, is the better striker between the two, and if Ortega couldn't finish him, then I think he'll survive Lopes grappling too. We've seen Volk go all 5 rounds numerous times, while we've seen Lopes tire out in 3-rounders. Skill for skill, Volkanovski is the better fighter, but all that skill, experience, and wisdom means absolutely nothing if Father Time has caught up to him. Lopes, while not as refined and tested as Volk, is younger, more durable, and we both know he can take a punch much better than Volk can at this stage. The first round will be dangerous for Volk. Lopes is explosive, unpredictable, and thrives in chaos. He may not be as powerful of a puncher as Topuria, but don't get it twisted. If Volk makes a mistake or mistimes a defensive step, Lopes can and will end his night with a clean shot for a hat trick of concussions. As the fight progresses, cardio becomes the X factor. Lopes has shown signs of slowing down in past fights, especially when forced past the second round. Volk, even at this stage of his career, is still, I hope, at least, one of the more well-conditioned fighters. If he can drag Lopes into the later rounds, his experience, striking, and fight IQ could take over. But that's a big if. Maybe he has lost his cardio too. Maybe Volk shows up a complete shell of his former self and gets mauled. He is a 36-year-old featherweight up against a new generation, but he's also Alexander Volkanovski, the same man who built an era of dominance at 145. If there's anyone who can turn back the clock, even for one more fight, one night, it's him. Experience, skill, and the legacy of an all-time great champion against the youth, tenacity, and hunger of someone who desperately wants to be champion. Time to find out about whether greatness can defy time, whether legacy can withstand the onslaught of the next in line, or whether the main event of UFC 314 marks a passing of the torch where the old guard is taught to step aside and the new era begins. Can the Bellator legend silence the doubters and announce himself as a real contender? Or will Yair remind him that the UFC octagon is a different place altogether? Who will prevail in the Battle of Armageddon? Will Bryce's soul find salvation, or will he actually end up in purgatory? There's Paddy Pimblett, the polarizing Scouser with everything to prove. Can he make the biggest leap of his career and prove people wrong on the biggest stage so far? Or were they right all along? And finally, the main event, Alexander Volkanovski, a conqueror who ruled the featherweight division for years, now faces an unrelenting force in Diego Lopes. Does Volk still have the fire to fend off the next generation? Or is this the night the tides shift and the book is forever closed? For the music playlist, thumbnail designs, your name and credits, and even some cool TFB badges next to your name, you can now join right here on YouTube. For the extra content, SEO editing, breakdowns, and more, you can still find it all on Patreon. Boys, thank you so much for watching the videos. Your support doesn't go unnoticed.